Ever feel like you're just swimming in a sea of headlines, never really getting the full story?
Yeah, definitely.
Well, today we're diving deep, deep, deep into San Francisco's Board of Supervisors meeting minutes
Oh, wow.
from January 2020.
Okay.
Specifically, we're looking at the 9th, the 23rd, and the 30th. We are on a mission to unearth the hidden narratives, the stories, the drama
Right.
buried in these, what some might call dry bureaucratic records. Trust me, there's more drama here than your average city council meeting.
Yeah, I bet.
Joining me on this deep dive is our expert researcher. They're here to help us kind of connect the dots and answer that big question, why? What's the first gem that we're going to dig into today?
Well, I think we got to kick things off with a theme that is always top of mind for any city. Money.
Always.
Right?
Let's unpack this. So right off the bat, on January 9th, we've got a $15 million grant to combat organized retail theft. That's a hefty chunk of change.
It is.
What's the story there?
I mean, on the surface, this grant, it really highlights the kind of the scale of the challenges that San Francisco's facing
Right.
with theft, right?
Yeah.
But what I think is more interesting is that it points to this bigger trend that we're seeing, which is this increased reliance on state funding for local issues. So it makes you wonder, is that sustainable,
Hey.
in the long run?
Yeah, it really makes you wonder about the long-term financial picture. And speaking of big spending, the city also signed off on some major tech contracts,
Yeah.
each with a $20 million ceiling.
Right.
So think about that new parking app that everyone loves.
Right.
This could be part of that whole digital transformation.
It's so fascinating how, these contracts, they seem kind of mundane on the surface, but they give us a glimpse into the city's priorities.
Absolutely.
Like, what is their long-term vision? They're clearly investing in technology, but at what cost, right? To other essential services.
Yeah, and speaking of essential services, let's talk about the emergency repairs at Zuckerberg San Francisco General. A chiller, a boiler, and a cooling tower all gave out in a major building.
Oh, no.
Yeah, talk about dodging a bullet.
Yeah.
Imagine if they hadn't addressed that quickly. Like, what would have been the impact on patients?
Absolutely, yeah. And this is to me, this speaks to the need for, ongoing infrastructure maintenance. I mean, it's not flashy, but,
It's not sexy.
it's not sexy. But if you ignore it, it can lead to these, costly emergencies.
Right.
And it can even compromise public health.
It's that classic pay now or pay more later situation.
Exactly.
But I mean, beyond the budget, I think these breakdowns show how vulnerable even our most important institutions are.
Yeah, absolutely.
We were talking about vulnerability, and the board tackled safety on a bunch of different fronts. There's a grant to prevent catalytic converter theft.
Hard.
Talk about a targeted approach.
Right.
And then stricter rules for those medical testing sites.
Interesting. See, because, on the surface, those seem harmless, right?
Oh.
But this new ordinance kind of suggests that there were concerns about patients,
Yeah.
maybe being taken advantage of, or even how reliable are the test results themselves. Makes you think. Makes you think about the hidden dangers lurking in these places you'd never expect.
Right. It's like an episode of your favorite detective show.
Right.
But not every story is about crime and intrigue. Sometimes it's about the community taking center stage.
Yeah.
Take the Safeway on Webster Street. They were going to close, right? But Supervisor Preston steps in, urges them to reconsider, and boom, by the 23rd, they've extended the closing date by almost a year.
Wow. See, that's a testament to the power of the community. But it also begs the question, are these big corporations only responsive when their profits are on the line?
It makes you think about, who really has the power in those situations? And speaking of power dynamics, remember that whole debate about the Hested payments?
Oh, yeah, the Civic Bridge program.
Yes.
And that exemption. Yeah, so we're talking about behested payments. Basically, donations that public officials ask for a certain cause, right?
Okay.
And the board did end up letting the mayor's office solicit those in-kind donations, but not without some back and forth.
Oh, there's definitely some drama.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, on one hand, you want to encourage private support for public good.
Sure.
Right? But then on the other, is there a risk of, are people getting favors? Is there a lack of transparency?
A tough one.
This whole push and pull, right, between let's get things done and let's be accountable, it comes up again and again in these minutes.
And it's not just about the money either. This tension pops up again when we look at how the board is responding to gun violence.
Right.
Like, on the one hand, you see them supporting that state legislation,
Right.
to close that locked door loophole.
Which, by the way, has been a major headache for law enforcement.
Oh, totally.
Trying to prosecute car break-ins. So this is a big deal.
Huge. But at the same time, we also see the board declaring National Gun Violence Survivors Week.
Yeah.
I mean, it's symbolic, right?
Right.
But it kind of highlights how limited they are. Like, what can local government really do
Right.
about a problem like gun control that's happening all over the country?
Yeah. It's a good reminder that they have to choose their battles. And speaking of battles, these minutes are full of discussions about development projects. One that I thought was really interesting was that proposed land exchange
Okay.
near Kensington Way. They're thinking about swapping that vacant land on Edge Hill Mountain for city property over by Moraga and Noriega Avenues.
Makes you wonder what they've got planned for that Edge Hill property.
Right.
Luxury condos, a park, who knows?
Right.
But it just shows how these land use decisions have the power to totally reshape the city.
Totally.
And they often lead to these really heated debates.
Oh, yeah, for sure. And then you've got that whole saga of 2395 Sacramento Street,
What was that?
a proposed 7-story residential building.
7 stories.
I know. It
Wow.
triggered this whole long appeal hearing. I'm starting to think the only way left to build in San Francisco is up.
Oh, they don't have endless space, right?
Like,
And the population keeps growing.
yeah.
So, yeah, building up is often presented as like the solution.
Right.
But as you can see from these appeals, not everyone's happy about it.
Of course not.
There are concerns about density, about whether people can afford to live there, about keeping the character of the neighborhood the same.
Yep.
These are themes that come up all the time in these minutes.
It's the classic San Francisco dilemma, trying to balance progress with preserving what's already here. And, speaking of interesting juxtapositions,
Okay.
there was this one moment in the minutes that made me laugh out loud.
Oh, yeah. What was that?
Supervisor Stefani's request for information about vendors who destroy firearms.
Wait, really?
I'm serious. It's not every day you see firearm destruction just casually on a meeting agenda.
That's amazing. It's those little unexpected details that make these minutes so interesting.
Right.
You get this peek behind the curtain of government, and you see what it's really like to run a city.
It's so true. And speaking of unexpected insights, there was that public comment on January 9th about accessibility of the meeting minutes themselves.
Oh, the irony.
Right. Someone's worried about ADA compliance during the meeting whose minutes might not even be accessible.
So meta,
Yeah,
it really makes you think about who's being included and who's not.
for sure.
And it reminds us that even the people in charge have to follow the same rules as everyone else.
Right. And it shows the limits of what gets recorded,
Totally.
These minutes capture one perspective,
Right.
but they don't always tell the whole story. Sometimes the most important stories are the ones happening in between the lines. It makes you think about that whole APEC summit that San Francisco hosted last year.
Oh, yeah, in 2023.
Right. We always hear about the economic benefits of these big international events.
Right.
But I feel like these minutes tell a slightly different story.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, we see this grant for over $6 million
Wow.
just to cover overtime for the police department
Wow.
because of APEC. And then on the 23rd, they're talking about giving money to SOMA businesses because they were hurt by the summit.
It makes you wonder, was it really worth it for the average person living in San Francisco?
Right. What's the real cost?
Yeah, not just in dollars, but how disruptive was it to everyone's lives?
Exactly.
It's something to think about as the city's deciding whether to host more events in the future.
Totally. And, speaking of balancing different needs,
Yeah.
the city also had to get ready for Lunar New Year, which, as you can imagine, involves a whole other set of challenges.
Logistically, for sure.
Right. The board approved funding for free parking and free transit fares during the parade.
Love that.
Always a popular move.
Right. Who doesn't love that?
Exactly. But I think beyond the practical stuff, it shows how committed the city is to celebrating all its different cultures.
Absolutely. And we see that throughout these minutes.
Totally. Like that resolution supporting the Soma Pilipinas Gateway Cultural Marker.
Yes.
I mean, this is going to be a permanent monument to Filipino culture and identity.
That's amazing.
It's part of this bigger effort to make sure public spaces really represent everyone.
Right. So everyone feels like they belong.
Exactly. Even small things can make a big difference.
They really can.
Yeah.
So as we kind of come up for air after this deep dive into these Board of Supervisors meetings, what have we learned? Was this just a bunch of numbers and resolutions?
I don't think so. I think what we really saw is A city trying to deal with some really complicated issues.
Right.
Social equity, the economy, safety. These minutes might seem boring on the surface, but they show us how local government really works.
And how those decisions have a real impact on people's lives.
Exactly.
It reminds us that these aren't just abstract debates. They're about the future of San Francisco.
Totally. The streets we walk down, the businesses we visit, the people we interact with every day.
And as we've seen, the people who live here, they have a powerful voice.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So next time you read a headline about a local issue, don't just keep scrolling.
Right.
Dig a little deeper, ask some questions, and don't be afraid to speak your mind.
Yes.
Because you have a say in how San Francisco changes.
Yeah. I love that. So well said. That's all the time we have for today's deep dive.
This was great.
Until next time, stay curious.